Hello everyone, welcome to EMD Media. EMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing. And it strives to contribute for evidence-based decision-making and discourse in the whole, and particularly in Ethiopia. Those who are following us on YouTube and Facebook, please share, like, and subscribe so that many can reach out to this content. Today, it's my great pleasure once again to have Professor Kjetil Tronvoll as my guest. Welcome again to EMD Media, Prof.
Thank you so much for inviting me again.
Great. So I gather that you are now in Africa. So we'll be talking about latest and recent developments in Tigray and the ramifications and what's coming in the coming weeks, maybe in months. So Operation Alula, I just want to start from there. Is the semantic important here, given the history of TPLF, Tigray, and so on, and how it's viewed the past history and heritage? So let's start there from the naming of the operation that started maybe now 12 days ago.
Yes, it is a symbolic name, obviously. And we have seen during this new struggle, the naming of events and offensives are important. The former offensive was called after Sium Mesvin, the assassinated former foreign minister of Ethiopia. This one, Operation Alula, obviously harks back to Ras Alula and his prominence as a Tigrayan/Ethiopian general officer, particularly in the battle at Adwa against the Italian invasion. So yes, we see then a deliberate, a conscious attempt to anchor the current struggle, the current military offensive against the federal forces within this deeper timeline of heroic Tigrayan warring tradition, so to say. So it is an interesting selection of name, yeah.
On that, again, talking about semantics, now as we speak, the TPLF, some want to call them, but the TDF, given that we have opposition parties, just young people who joined the armed struggle and so on. The TDF recaptured Mekelle and Shire. Maybe, as we speak, other towns might be recaptured again. But the international media is referring to them as the rebels. Again, I'm talking about semantics. Is it fair? Because I see on the social media many Tigray activists opposing that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And the semantics are very important in these processes. International media, they like to categorize everything and anyone fighting a government as rebels without further kind of consideration to that labeling. I try to use the terms TDF here as an all-embracive, all-inclusive embodiment of the Tigrayan resistance It involves the TPLF leadership. It involves ex-TPLF dissenters. It involves opposition leaders from Salsai Boyane, from TDI, from Baitona. It involves everyone in Tigray, young and old, female and male. So TDF, I think, is the right description of the armed resistance representatives. And then, of course, you have a TDF leadership which possibly could be called the elected government of Tigray. Not TPLF, but the elected government of Tigray. And that's the legal political entity relevant going forward in the possible negotiations. That's the elected government of Tigray as the representatives of the Tigrayan people.
Yeah, so this is a comment that you gave last night. So talking about the ceasefire. So do you know the Ethiopian government, Abiy's government is positioning this, and the elite that's supporting it is positioning this as if it's a political decision, a humanitarian decision, and so on. So can you speak to that? Because you are following from what you observed in the press release from Tigray interim government versus the federal one, all that and so on. So what are we seeing in terms of, again, this semantics of what's happening?
Yes, and that's part of, the war is fought on the battlefields in Tigray, but it is also fought in the media. So, and particularly to get the international attention and to get international sympathy and to get international legitimacy, it is important to use the right terms and to spin the narratives supporting your side. We have seen throughout, since 4th of November, and it has been properly documented and exposed over and over again, that the majority of the information emanating from Addis Ababa, be that the Prime Minister's office, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or the military leadership, is falsehoods, are pure propaganda, are manipulated information, disinformation, rejecting famine, rejecting hunger, rejecting even the existence of TDF, rejecting the war, all these kind of peddling of a narrative to comfort the Ethiopian people, I assume, but also to influence the international community of not engaging, not disturbing, do not interfere into our business. We do as we want in Tigray. So that has been a very consistent propaganda narrative peddled by Ethiopian authorities. And that's what then certainly links into this bizarre unilateral declaration of ceasefire, which obviously should rather be termed declaration of military defeat, that we are pulling out because we lost the battle. But of course, a government will never admit or seldom admit open-heartedly that they lose a military battle. So to try to comfort again the Ethiopian people that we haven't lost anything, so to say. Sadly enough, thousands of young Ethiopian men and women have perished in the battlefields in Tigray. It's a tragedy for the whole country, not only for Tigray. But more importantly, I think that the use of a ceasefire terminology in that statement is alluding to the international community to again try to throw, blurring the eyes of what's actually going on, taking a so-called moral high ground, saying, in this bizarre statement that we are concerned about the Tigray people, we are concerned about the famine, we need to listen to the farmers who want to plant and prepare their agricultural fields. They say that 3-4 days after Abiy Ahmed went on television, discarding any kind of problems in Tigray, discarding the existence of a famine, rejecting that Tigray children were starving and so on. So you see the total contradiction in communication here is quite bizarre, but interesting to follow. And surprisingly, you may say, there are actually Western diplomats who buy into that propaganda narrative of the government. And sadly, also, I believe there are Ethiopians who think it is correct what the government are saying. They still haven't fully discovered that the government has been lying to them consistently over the last 8 months. But now we also see an awakening in that effect and a genuine pushback from certain segments of the Ethiopian people, crying out that we have been lied to, we have been fooled, and so on. And that's good, because everyone needs to expose falsehoods and lies, particularly from political leaders who are supposed to be responsible.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't confirmed the authenticity of that, but yesterday there was a release where the Abiy was explaining that partly why they had to leave Tigray was he felt the people are fighting the military. So he was saying that the first weeks and so on, we defeated the men and women maybe in uniform, but then it's the people who are attacking us and so on. So is this, I mean, for me, it's a replay of what Mengistu said, the last months and years of the 17 years of struggle. So are we seeing a repeat of what happened in 1984, partly because as we speak, Tigray is closed, and I saw Eritrean government supporters mentioning that this is a strategic retreat to let the Tigray people see what happens in the months to come, what they are going to eat and so on. So is this also part of the strategy in your view?
There are a lot of similarities with what happened during the 17 years of struggle in the 70s and 80s and what's happening today. Scaring similarities. Also scaring similarities in the impact of Ethiopia as such and the integrity of the country, which will follow. That is true. And I must also add that Abiy Ahmed finally recognizes that he is not popular and ENDF is not popular in Tigray, and it is actually a people's war against the ENDF. Yes, that's correct too. As I said, TDF encompasses all parts, all components of Tigrayan society. So that is also true. And again, the Eritrean narrative, it's laughable, and that's usually what comes from Asmara is laughable. But this time you see, and I wrote a lengthy article last week on that in the Africa Report and Ethiopia Insight, analyzing and commenting and predicting that Eritrean forces will very soon leave Tigray because they are also overwhelmed by the TDF offensive. And ENDF and Ethiopian authorities actually thought that the Eritrean forces should come to their rescue. Abiy Ahmed has naively trusted Isaias Afwerki here, which obviously is a mistake. And we have concrete information that EDF forces actually avoided to enter into battle to rescue ENDF divisions which were surrendered by TDF. They pulled back in order to save their own skin. So yes, we hear and we have concrete information from the ground that Eritrean forces are leaving towns and areas in northern Tigray without any fight. They're pulling back. And as I also predicted, they have built some fortifications along the border, and they have built trenches on the Eritrean sides. So what the EDF now is doing is to prepare defensive positions, awaiting a possible TDF offensive. And we also hear from Asmara that Eritrean officials in Asmara are running around scared that TDF actually will cross Mereb in order to take out the fight on Isaias Afwerki himself. I lost you. You are muted.
Sorry. I saw the exchange you had with Yamana Charlie on that. He was pointing that there is this invasion that, how they call it. So let's talk about that. So because many haven't expected, there were people like you maybe who are following closely how this is going and so on. But we were waiting for months and months of operation, maybe after Tatkan, Migbe, and what Duarada came out on the media and talking about, how they are coming back and so on. So, but this happened within 10 days. So what's next? So there are people who say, they should go all the way to Asmara and, topple Isaias. There are people who say, their move should be to the south and so on. So what are we hearing? Because I know you were in communication with Debrecen, with Getachew Reda and so on. So what are you reading would be happening in the coming weeks or days?
Yes, I talk regularly to Debrecen. I spoke to him this morning. I talk every day more or less with Getachew Reda. I speak to a lot of informants in the field. I speak to Ethiopian officials clandestinely. I speak to internationals. I speak to everyone who wants to speak to me, to say it like that, in order to hear the differences of views and the differences of interpretations. I don't only listen to one side, but I do give regular, more or less daily updates from Getachew and frequently by Debrecen. And I think, we have to listen to what they say. We have to listen to what they say. TPLF earlier has always been rather consistent in what they articulate is actually what they are doing. And the TDF has also been rather consistent in following up their statements, so to say, throughout this last 8 months, but also, TPLF earlier in the pre-run and the precursor to the war, when the regional government of Tigray said that, okay, if the federal government will not conduct elections, we will go ahead and do it. Everybody laughed at that and didn't believe in it. I did believe in it, and it happened, some few months later, as we know. So I think it is important to understand the history, the ideology, the political underpinnings of the government in Tigray and TDF, and assess it on its merits. And they have been open in their own objectives. They have presented earlier some preconditions in February, 8 preconditions on the way forward. I know now they are revising those preconditions because the terrain has shifted. So Debrecen mentioned to me this morning that they will issue a new set of preconditions on the way forward, probably tomorrow. Getachew has also been open, commenting to other media in addition to telling me. So I'm not disclosing sensitive information here, but which I hold back if it is sensitive. But this is open, and he has clearly said that TDF will not stop the momentum now. The unilateral declaration of ceasefire by Ethiopian government is interpreted as it should be, as a defeat, as an excuse to buy time, to regroup, restock, retrain, repurchase arms supplies. And TDF are not interested to allow them that. So they are in hot pursuit of ENDF forces also beyond Tigray territory, as far as I know. It is 5 divisions of ENDF stationed in Amhara, which probably will be engaged. And of course, they have an objective to liberate West Tigray from Amhara regional administration. I saw that Amhara regional government in Bahir Dar issued a statement now just recently on that fact too. And Eritrea is also issuing statements that of concern that TDF will attack them, which is also on the agenda. It is clear that the Tigrayan leadership has stated that they are in this now to finish the war, to liberate Tigray territories, but also to make sure that Amhara forces, Ethiopian forces, or Eritrean forces never again can pose a threat to the collective and individual security of Tigrayans. You can say that is a very bold statement, and it's a certain element of hybris in that. But so far, they have managed to deliver on their military objectives. So we have to wait and see if they manage to accomplish also what they say in this regard.
Talking about Eritrea and the larger, region, and we'll also speak about the international community at large. So in Eritrea, there is this satellite, image showing what has been happening at Assab the last weeks and so on, after UAE and whoever was there left weeks ago. So do we see, because Abiy also called immediately, I think it's on the report, to the UAE after leaving Mekelle and so on. So are we seeing another maybe reinforcement of what happened maybe in early November and December? So what is your reading of the Middle East and other actors who supported this invasion of Tigray in November?
Well, we need further investigation in the aftermath of this war about the evolvement of battles, so to say, and the military strength on the ground. But indications are, and I have a lot of information on it from various actors, that the rather quick offensives of ENDF, Amhara, and Eritrean forces in November and until taking Mekelle was mainly due to Emirati drones taking out the mechanized units of TDF and taking out communication centrals of TDF and also some of the leadership structures of the military side. Without those drone attacks, that first offensive would have looked very differently. And we can prove that, so to say, retrospectively by the fact that after the Biden administration took power in Washington, they put pressure on Emirates to close down the base in Assab. And we saw a change of dynamic on the ground, more or less from one day to the other, when the drones were pulled out of the war theater in Tigray. And then from then and onwards, from late January and onwards, the TDF has been on the offensive, so to say, and winning day by day terrain. That has not been acknowledged by Addis Ababa, and it's not been acknowledged by the international community. So this last 10-day offensive, Operation Alula, came as a surprise, but it isn't, because there has been a gradual build-up over 5 months to this final culmination with Operation Alula. And we also know, as you say, that Ethiopia is desperately seeking international armed deals as we speak, and particularly are interested to purchase drones and drones capacity again. That's why it's important for the international community, and particularly UN Security Council, who will discuss the situation this coming Friday, as far as I understand. They need to discuss and decide on the weapons embargo on Ethiopia, Eritrea, and every actor, every belligerent actor in that region, because it would be a disaster if the two countries, Eritrea and Ethiopia, are spending their meager resources to using tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to buy arms to kill their own citizens.
Yeah, talking about this development in maybe going to Asmara and so on. So what is your reading of opposition, maybe armed or not armed opposition parties in Eritrea, and how the people of Eritrea would be responding to this possible development in the coming days or weeks?
Well, as far as I know, and I think I know pretty well, there are no organized opposition groups, unarmed, in Eritrea as such. Well, there are clandestine networks, but you don't have movements or, structures inside the country. You do have it abroad, obviously, in exile. You possibly have some in Sudan, and possibly even, some small units affiliated with the TDF fight in Tigray. It's a good question how to interpret the sentiment in Eritrea. I've been living there for some years. It's a while back. I know a lot of Eritreans in diaspora. I speak frequently with Eritrean leadership in diaspora and other intellectuals and so on, trying to assess, trying to understand that sentiment internally. I think there is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of denial. Basically because they have been cut off from the world for 20 years, communication-wise, information-wise, knowledge-wise, capacity building-wise. The Eritrean people have basically been kept hostage, imprisoned by their own president for 20 years. And they have been thoroughly brainwashed. And the enemy image presented by President Isaias Afwerki, that the TPLF and the Tigrayans are the reason why I have to do this to you. That kind of bizarre logic has somehow stuck to many Eritreans. The only reason for what Isaias have been doing to the Eritrean people is his own power mongering, his own interest to stay in power. That's it. It shouldn't be externalized at all. So it will be interesting to see the consequences going forward about Eritrean citizens' support for the regime. And I have said, and I say again, it is one thing to fight EDF on Tigrayan soil and win. It is a different thing to carry that struggle inside Eritrea, to fight Eritreans on their own soil, because then suddenly everything of other narratives comes into play about the liberation struggle and about the plight and so on. And that is the danger that TDF, if they do want to carry the struggle into Eritrea, should be very careful about. That again can rekindle and revoke an Eritrean nationalism, which are very deeply rooted in parts of the society. So I'm hesitating to conclude. I'm definitely believe that the absolute majority of the Eritrean people are praying every day to get rid of their president. The absolute majority. There's still a certain segment who support Isaias, but they are basically in diaspora, feeding off the system, so to say. There are rather few at the very top of society, at the very top of the military structure, who are benefiting from the system, and very few politicians are benefiting from the system. I know that ministers within his own government hate him, but they don't dare to speak out. So a lot of top-level people in PFDJ, in the Eritrean government, who would like to see President Isaias gone tomorrow. No doubt about that. But they're all kind of captured, held hostage by this extreme surveillance state and by the extreme repressive, coercive mechanism exhibited by President Isaias. So it can tilt both ways in a way. It can be a massive support for a surge of ousting the regime and getting it replaced by a genuine Eritrean representative government. Or it can turn into some kind of nationalistic pushback against Tigrayans, Ethiopians invading us once again. So it's a delicate situation here.
It is indeed, yeah. And some are worried about the Al-Qaeda type of militants, in the region, including maybe in Eritrea as well, and so on. So is that a risk that everyone should be worried about?
I don't think we have any indications or empirical evidence that Al-Qaeda or ISIS are present in Eritrea today. I seriously doubt that. They are present other places in the Horn, but not in Eritrea. If we have an Eritrean state collapse, which is plausible post-Isaias, then, of course, it might be a possibility for those kind of international terrorist networks to get a foothold in Eritrea. If there are no authority controlling the terrain, controlling the territory, that might happen. But and that's a danger in the process ahead now, because there are possibilities of state collapses in the Horn, and and there are possibilities of state reconfigurations now ongoing. And that creates power vacuums, it creates geographical realignments, it creates geopolitical realignments, and that also opens up for opportunities for destructive forces, as you indicate, to get control, which are in the vicinity in the region already. And of course, people are desperate. People are desperate on humanitarian needs. They're desperate for fulfilling their lives. They're desperate for political rights, for a political agenda, for a vision. So people can be captured into more destructive processes too. Yeah. So the international community, everyone should be extremely concerned and follow the situation very closely.
Talking about the international community, you mentioned about the United Nations Security Council meeting. Actually, the call is for a public meeting, which would be the first time if it happens. And you expressed your disappointment by Norway's not joining in terms of the call and so on. So yesterday there was the House Foreign Affairs Committee of the US having had a hearing on this, on Tigray and so on. So there are diverse voices, but there is a clarity in terms of what is happening in terms of the accountability of crimes committed there and so on. So what is your reading after Mekele's recapture, and maybe Shure's as well? Let me just take a minute or two to just show. This is a New York Times showing how Mekele was celebrating. But one thing that was, with a movie, or a video, was this from Shure. So this is the Shure's recapture, and I was mentioning early on to people, like, if people care about indicators, they can compare and contrast what will happen when Shure was captured by the Ethiopian forces, Amhara forces, and Eritrean forces, and so on. So given what we know now at this moment, how do you assess the, you mentioned a bit of that, but you can expand on how the international community is responding right now and should respond, if they really want to do a positive change and intervention in the region.
Well, as I said earlier, I think many of the international actors, meaning bilateral states, but also the UN system, for instance, are baffled, are confused, don't understand, don't have difficulties to relate to the facts on the ground. And we know there is a lot of confusion and misreporting from embassies back to their home offices about what's actually happening. There is a lot of disinformation, misinformation, misreporting within the UN system in Ethiopia on the issues unfolding in Tigray. The UN is very, it's a chaotic organizational setup. It's more or less redundant when it comes to handling this kind of situations. You have some of the agencies who manage to do a good job, absolutely, but the system itself is very, very sluggish. It takes a very long time for it to react. And the Secretary General office has obviously failed from the very start of this conflict to take proper action and to follow up closely. So I think you have certain assertive governments, particularly then the Biden administration, after they taking power, they have been very active. Elements within the EU have been active, but the Brussels system again has not been as such, but there are individuals at the very top. So I think they are now running around as we speak, and I know that, trying to figure out what the hell has happened. trying to understand this, because the so-called were taken by surprise. Again, this hasn't been any surprise for those of us who have followed it and who has a certain analytical capacity to figure out what's happening, drawing on historical elements and knowing the actors and knowing the spirits and knowing the ideology and so on. So the question is, what are they doing now going forward? Are there any role for the international society at all? I'm not so sure about that, actually. It might be too late. TDF is now in a position of strength. They don't have to come creeping to the negotiation table. It is Abiy Ahmed who have to come creeping to the negotiation table. So it's not sure that TDF are so interested to speak to international actors, many of whom have disregarded them throughout the whole period. And now, obviously, when they see that the winds are changing and TDF took control of Mekelle, diplomats from several countries are eager to come into play in order to present a peace agreement. Because then if a diplomat or if a country, MFA, is managing to negotiate the peace agreement, wow, look how good we are, then they are kind of floating on that. So it's very, to be frank, it's a very dirty game, how they have been handling the process from day one. And I think the TDF leadership are very experienced and skilled in understanding this. And I think they will be very careful in relating to many of these international actors now in the period we are under. Also because these international actors, more or less all of them, are objecting to the goals of the struggle, to the objectives of TDF. Because the objectives of TDF we know, and no international actor is supporting that. So what role can then they play if they don't have a bit more understanding of the political situation as viewed from Mekelle? So I think often in situations like this, from the international viewpoint, there is a humanitarian principle, do no harm. Be careful in what you do, and if you do something, have a minimum threshold that at least it should not contribute to doing the situation worse. Maybe you not manage to improve it, but at least don't make it worse. And I think some of the international engagement now is actually making the situation worse. So my advice would be for some of them to back off, actually, because they don't know the context. They don't have the trust on both sides. They don't understand Ethiopia, for that matter, or Abiy Ahmed, and the interest at play at the federal level, the interest at play in Amhara region, in Tigray, in Eritrea. So I'm very hesitant to say that, let UN or let the international community fix this. No, I don't think. I think we should be very careful in saying so.
My last question before I let you go is talking about advising. So you're mentioning about the international community, those who are concerned on this. They should not jump into any conclusion before they deploy the right analytical tools and so on. So I know you are analytical, your interest is on studying, researching the region and so on. But if you were to advise, looking every element of the equation, to advise the TDF, the Tigrayan diaspora, what would be your advice given what we know now and what might come in the coming days and weeks?
I will be very careful to offer advice to TDF because I don't think they listen to me anyway. So and that's me.
Like people maybe.
but I just tweeted earlier today that to get the we have a very limited window of opportunity now as we speak. It is not many days, actually, maybe not even days. There are hours where we can act both as internationals, but also as Ethiopian government, in order to try to save the integrity of the Ethiopian state, if that is the common interest. And I think it should be a common interest for all of us. And if that is the objective, the international community has to put pressure on Ethiopia, not on TDF. It has to put pressure on the Ethiopian government to accept the realities on the ground, to accept the fact that TDF and the elected government of Tigray are in control of Tigrayan territory, to accept the fact that they lost the military battle, at least this phase of it, to deregister TPLF as a terrorist organization, so they are a legal entity they can talk to include them and to recognize them as the legitimate representatives of the Tigrayan people, as the elected government of Tigray, and then to open up for an all-inclusive national dialogue, not only versus the Tigrayan case and the Tigrayan war, but the huge challenges in Oromia in particular. And as an effect of that, you should definitely release the political leaders of OFC and OLF, Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Garba, and the others, and to invite them, because they are needed, into this inclusive dialogue. So Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian government has to take 10 steps back and say to themselves, is it our interest to save the Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian state as we know it? Or should we just bash on, as we have done during the last several months, and disregard the empirical reality and think that we can manage to crush everyone and to coerce everyone to follow our agenda? Earlier regimes in Ethiopia has thought that, and we know how that has ended. So I think it is a very precarious timeline ahead. And again, it is the Ethiopian government who needs to face up and smell the coffee, so to say, to accept realities. And the international community's role here is to make sure that the Ethiopian government really understands the seriousness of the situation. TDF, we will know later today, tomorrow, about their new conditions for peace talks. And then it is possible to see if there are some space to enter into some kind of process where the minimum common denominators can be identified. And maybe that process is not, maybe that, it is even better if a political diplomatic process are in place which facilitates an orderly transition. If that transition is to a new Ethiopia with a new constitution, be that as it may, if that transition is to reinvigorate the current constitutional framework, be that as it may, if that process is to reconfigure Ethiopian statehood and to accept that certain elements, certain states within the federation does no longer want to be part of the federation, be that as it may. But it is much better that this is an orderly, politically negotiated process than it is to turn back to a military collapse and the destruction of Ethiopian societies across the territory.
With that, I want to end. You don't want to, I think, give advice to the Tagaro diaspora. So
they are good. They are doing a good enough job without my advice.
Okay, great. So continue on, right? Keep on. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight on this still unfolding development. I hope to catch up with you again once we hear, the coming up developments in Tigray and in the region in general. Thank you, Professor Tronvoll, for your time today.
Thank you so much, my friend. Anytime.
Dear viewers, you have been following my conversation with Professor Kjetil Tronvoll. He is now in Africa. He is a very well-known researcher on the Horn of Africa region. Tomorrow I'll be speaking with Yosef Gabrehebot. He's a prolific writer of Eritrean origin in the US. I will be speaking to him on Covadis, Ethiopia, Eritrea, War on Tigray, other lens. For those who have been following us on YouTube, Facebook, please share for broader audience. This was your host, Getachew Asafa, and have a good day.